According to History.com, in the United States, there are more than 700 Confederate monuments and statues in the United States. Over the past several years, there have been many discussions and debates on whether these Confederate monuments should be removed. Some label these monuments as bastions of Southern culture and history, while others claim they contradict the democracy and equality that we fought for in the past and still to this day. Today, I will be discussing the reasons why Confederate monuments should be removed. Today, I will discuss the history of the Confederacy, the Lost Cause movement, and the idea of erasing history. To begin today, let's talk about the history of the Confederacy and what the Confederacy stood for. To understand what the Confederacy stood for, let's look directly at primary sources, the secession papers of states that revolted against the United States to create the Confederacy. What better way to understand their ideals and motives than the direct words that they said? According to Yale Law Library, the state of Mississippi, in their secession declaration, states, quote, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world," end quote. Furthermore, the declaration states, quote, "It," referring to President-elect Abraham Lincoln's declaration to end slavery, "denies the right of property in slaves and refuses protection to that right on the high seas, in the territories, and wherever the government of the United States has jurisdiction, advocates Negro equality socially and politically, has nullified the fugitive slave law in almost every free state in the Union," end quote. These statements are clear and in solidarity. Several of these seceding states wrote additional letters specifically naming slavery as the root cause of turning against the United States. Moreover, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, stated, quote, "African slavery as it exists in the United States is a moral, social, and political blessing. If slavery is a sin, it is not yours. It does not rest on your action for its origin or your consent for its existence. It is common law right to property in the service of man. Its origin was divine decree. My own convictions as to Negro slavery are strong. It has evils and abuses. We recognize the Negro as God in God's book and God's laws in nature tell us to recognize him as inferior, fitted expressly for servitude. You cannot transform the Negro into anything 1/10 as useful or as good as what slavery enables them to be," end quote. Here, Jefferson Davis is expressly saying that he believes God gives him the right to own slaves, and that African Americans are inferior and fit for only servitude. These states who turned against the United States and the leaders of the dissenters are clear in their message. They rejected the principles of equality given by the United States because they deemed their right to own slaves too great. Now that we've talked about the history of the Confederacy, let's talk about the Lost Cause movement and the expansion of the Confederate monuments. According to Mark Elliott, a historian at the University of North Carolina, most Confederate statues were erected between the 1890s and the 1950s, during the heart of the Jim Crow segregation era. The early years after the Civil War, there were markers at battlegrounds to mourn soldiers. This is in sharp contrast to these Confederate statues that were erected during the reign of Jim Crow segregation. These statues are clear in their intent based on the time that they were created. According to FacingSouth.org, an online platform discussing the history of Southern statues, that during the harsh decades of Jim Crow segregation, empowered by hatred and racism, many organizations, including one of the most prominent organizations, called the United Daughters of the Confederacy, funded the construction of many Confederate statues, including monuments to the Ku Klux Klan, including one that was constructed just outside the city of Concord, North Carolina. These Confederate sympathizers warped teaching curriculum in schools, glorified monuments of Confederate traitors to the United States, and built statues idolizing the Ku Klux Klan. This period of history is known as the Lost Cause movement. But don't just take my word for it. According to CivilWarJourneys.org, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, among other groups, spread propaganda including the decrees that the Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery, that slave owners treated their slaves well, and that slaves were, quote, loyal and faithful to their, quote, benevolent masters, and that the fight for the Confederacy and slavery was a, quote, just cause. The impact that these groups have on how the South views history can be seen today. We often find Southern organizations spouting these exact dogmatic ideas in direct contradiction to the history that we find around us. When a group has dogmatic decrees that put the words benevolent and masters together with loyal and slaves, it paints a very obvious picture of the propaganda that they are doing in rewriting history. Now that we've talked about the Lost Cause movement, Let's talk about the idea of removing Confederate statues as removing our history. Mike Pence, our Vice President of the United States, has stated, quote, "We have to walk away from this desire by some to erase parts of our history, just in the name of some contemporary political cause," end quote. What Mike Pence has wrong here is that it isn't the removal of these statues that is a contemporary political cause, but instead the creation of these statues, which was a contemporary political cause. Many of these statues, as I previously mentioned, were constructed after the Confederacy was dismantled. These bigoted groups, unable to move on from their archaic views, desired to erect statues during times where they felt emboldened and empowered to do so. Now, as a country, we should be actively working together to remove their bold claims of superiority and oppression on those who have fought, who have been harmed by the actions of slavery. History is important, and telling the right history is even more important. Statues pay homage while books tell history. We don't need larger-than-life statues of the President of the Confederate to remember the impact he had on history. Germany, after the events of World War II, removed all statues of Hitler and Nazism. They don't need statues of him to remind themselves of the impact he had on the world. If someone wants to understand his impact, rather than seeing a statue of him, people can read history books discussing Hitler's role in World War II, or people can visit countless statues and memorials honoring not him or his cause, but the people and societies he dismantled and ruined. Hitler, like Jefferson Davis, uplifted those who they deemed of higher status and sought to control and destroy those who were different. These Confederate statues and monuments of these individuals are not symbols of pride and glory, and their actions should not be ours to defend. They are dark blemishes on the world that we need to remind ourselves happen and actively seek not to glorify their acts by constructing statues or getting in the way of the removal of these statues. In conclusion, we have talked about the history of the Confederacy, the Lost Cause movement, and the idea of eroding our history. The notion that the Confederacy values about states' rights and not slavery is a disingenuous notion. The leaders of the Confederacy and the states that seceded directly state that slavery was their reason, the cause so great that they were willing to revolt against the United States in the hope of defending. Removing these statues is not removing our history or heritage. When Germans wish to learn about World War II, they need not turn to a statue of Hitler, but instead open the history books or visit historical memorials that pay homage to the people that suffered during those horrific times. They pay homage to statues and memorials to those that suffered, rather than pay homage to statues and memorials of those that caused the suffering and label that as their heritage. I say this not for us to be guilty of the transgressions of our ancestors, for we are not guilty of their sins, but to instead recognize the gift that we are given today to give a more accurate depiction of history, pay homage to the right people, and be on the right side of history.